Okay, welcome to our, our second lecture of the third week of developmental psychology. So today we're talking about, we're still in the period of the first 2 years of after birth, first 2 years, so 0 to 2 years of age. And today we're talking about psychosocial development. So it is the psychological stuff, the stuff that you guys probably will find more interesting. Not everything is interesting, but there's some interesting stuff in here. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about first personality development. I'm just going to review some theories really quick that you should have heard of that try to explain where our personality comes from, what it has to do with, okay? And then we'll go into infant relationships, which will be more interesting. We'll talk about bonds and attachment. That's very interesting. And then early and emotional development, and we'll even talk about daycare at the end. That's interesting, and I'm sure you're gonna want to listen there because, well, you should always be listening if you can, because it's, well, you know, there's some interesting stuff there. Okay, so I'm going to remind you now about theories of personality development. I'm not gonna go over them in detail. I'm just gonna remind you guys, okay? So we have Freud's theory. So this is psychosocial development. So mostly the psychological stuff, but it also affected by the social environment. So remember Freud's theory, right? The part of Freud's theory that has to do with this period of time, which with 0 to 2 years of age, are actually the oral stage and the anal stage. Remember Freud's theory? Right? The oral and anal stage are the first stages of his theory. The oral stage, remember, that's when newborns basically derive their pleasure primarily through the mouth. You know, you can develop an oral fixation later on if things don't go well. And then the anal stage has to do with basically with controlling the anus, or more specifically potty training. And depending on how that goes, you know, you'll develop a certain kind of personality. If you like control a bit too much, take to potty training really easily, you'll be more controlling. If you don't like potty training at all and you don't like to control yourself, you're more likely to be what he called anal expulsive, which means you won't control your emotions. You'll be aggressive and careless and messy and that kind of stuff. So Freud has some ways to explain personality, okay? Now his explanations about his theory are disputed by current developmental psychologists. They don't necessarily agree with Freud's theory, a lot of the parts, different aspects of it, but it's just the first 2 stages. And the point here is just to remind you a little bit about what his theory says, but we're not going to go into it in detail. So let's keep going. We also have Erikson's theory. Erikson's theory, I think, is a little bit more relevant to what we're going to talk about. But Erikson, remember, has a stage theory. For Erikson, there are 8 stages of development from birth basically until death. And it's the first 2 stages that have something to do with this, this period of life that we're talking about. So the first 2 stages of Erikson's theory are called trust versus mistrust and autonomy versus shame and doubt. So that trust versus mistrust, the first stage, what's happening during this time is that the infant is born and the infant is completely helpless and dependent on the mother or the caregiver for survival. If things go well, the infant will learn trust and will develop a good relationship with, you know, the mother or the caregiver, and is likely to have good relationships down the road as well. So this affects personality, okay? If the mother or the caregiver doesn't do a very good job of raising the infant, meeting the infant's needs, then the child will instead develop mistrust, will not be trusting of people, will not develop a very good relationship with the mother or with the caregiver, and is more likely to have bad relationships down the road because the child didn't really learn to trust. Okay, that's what Erikson's theory says about that first stage. A little bit later, closer to age 2 or 3, which is beyond what we're going to talk about today, but we'll still cover this. The second stage of Erikson's theory is called autonomy versus shame and doubt. So toddlers basically start gaining some abilities. They start learning how to walk, how to talk, and even how to use the potty. So there's some similarities here to Freud's theory. And toddlers will either succeed or fail in gaining a sense of self-rule and being able to basically govern themselves, to be autonomous. Self-rule over their actions and their bodies. If things go well and, potty training goes well and they acquire other abilities like, talking well and walking well and those kind of things, then they will develop a sense of autonomy, a sense that they can do things on their own. If things don't go well during potty training or other things and the parents are really mean, then the child will instead develop shame and doubt and will feel shameful and doubtful. And then will carry this shame and doubt, into the future. And it will characterize the person's child's personality even down the road. Just like that sense of trust gained early on during the first stage will affect relationships down the road, so will this shame and doubt or this autonomy that you can gain during the second stage. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Erikson's theory. It's just to remind you, okay, I could really spend a whole lecture just on this, and I do in my personality class. But it's just to remind you, it's just some theories that are trying to describe where personality comes from, why children behave and act and are the way they are. Another theory is the theory of behaviorism. Watson was a main advocate of that theory. Behaviorism is a theory that basically says that everything is learned. Everything is learned basically through rewards and punishments, reinforcement and punishment, to be more precise. So according to Watson and others that believe in this theory of behaviorism, personality and emotions develop through reinforcement of behavior. So for instance, a male child is rewarded for typical boy behavior. Okay, they're rewarded, for instance, for not crying so easily, for being tougher, for being more assertive. So they're rewarded for this boy behavior, which will affect their personality and their basically the development of their gender and how they think about themselves. You can reinforce, good behavior, like sharing and communication, things like that. You can also reinforce bad behavior. So your bad kids, your bad boys, so to speak, are the ones who have been rewarded for the wrong things, or at least they haven't been punished when they've shown that behavior and they've gotten away with it. Because punishment can also shape personality. A male child can be punished for acting like a girl, for instance, for playing with dolls or maybe dressing up like a girl. And the male child can be punished for that, which would lead to basically, getting rid of those behaviors. So this will shape the boy's personality. But you should also punish bad behavior, like when there's, screaming or there's fighting or something like that. You can also punish the child for that to let the child know that that's not appropriate behavior. So reinforcement and punishment is what leads to the development of one's personality, according to, the theory of behaviorism, or people like Watson. What we become is really nothing more than a pattern of behavior that has been rewarded. That's the behavior that we display. And then the behavior that is punished or ignored is the behavior that we do not show. Okay, that doesn't become part of our personality. Social learning theory, Bandura's theory, basically says that, something similar. A male child, for instance, observed boys play with trucks. So they learned that boys should play with trucks. They learn about what boys are like by observing boys. So in other words, from the social learning theory perspective, rewards and punishments, reinforcement and punishment are still at play here. They still work, but you don't have to be directly punished or rewarded to acquire a certain behavior, to become a certain kind of person. You just have to observe somebody being rewarded or somebody being punished, and that shapes your behavior and your personality. So these are both theories of learning. Epigenetic theory, the different explanation of personality development that I'm going to talk a little bit more about, because this is more directly related to actually development. So temperament theory, right? Temperament theory is a theory that describes the child's basic personality at birth. According to temperament theory, children are born with basically certain tendencies already that will then develop more fully down the road and will become their full-blown personality. But you can see a little bit of a person's personality even at birth. And temperament theory really looks at the child's basically emotional tendencies, motor, things have to do with movement, motor tendencies, attentional, how they pay attention to things and what they can handle, right? And even self-regulation, the extent to which they regulate themselves or do things in a predictable way. We'll talk about that. That will become more clear as we go through the different types of temperament or different types of personality according to temperament theory. So temperament theory is actually a theory of personality. It's actually has to do with personality traits. According to temperament theory, personality traits are stable and persistent. So we develop our personality, we develop these personality traits, and they're stable. They continue throughout our lifespan. They are developed, but we remain mostly the same. You know, we don't change that much, and we can see tendencies very early on. And a child has a certain temperament, a certain personality at birth. The child's temperament may fit well or poorly with the social environment, the environment they're being brought up in, and we'll talk about that. Basically, how they can be a mismatch between how the child's personality, their temperament, and their environment that can lead to problems. Temperament, or their basic personality at birth, will affect how the child perceives and reacts to the environment. It affects a lot of different things we'll talk about, and can be somewhat, and is considered to be somewhat genetic because it's present at birth. We can see these tendencies. It must be genetic. The child hasn't learned anything yet, okay? Temperament can interact with the environment and evolve as a result. We'll talk about that, how that can happen as well. I mean, you do grow and adapt and change. Your personality remains basically the same, but your personality can evolve and become more complex. So let's talk about these temperaments, because this is what is interesting. There's a study that was done called the New York Longitudinal Study that studied a whole bunch of children and studied their temperaments. And what they found is that there's 4 different kinds of temperaments, 4 different types of personalities that are present at birth. So one of them is basically the easy temperament, or you have your so-called easy children that have an easy temperament. These are children that have regularity of body functions. They're regular. What this means is that there's a regular time in which they get hungry, when they go to the bathroom, when they sleep, right? They are regular and predictable, which is a good thing, okay? You want them to be predictable, right? They get hungry at a certain time, right? Sleepy at a certain times when they need to go to the bathroom. Okay, they're easier to handle. They're easy children. Low to moderate intensity of reactions. So when something does happen, they can respond, kind of at a medium level or kind of low. In other words, they don't freak out that easily. They don't get super upset that easily, okay? They're low to moderate in their reactions. You don't want a child that is too extreme and is scared very easily or angered very easily and is very extreme. So these children are moderate to low in their intensity of reactions. Acceptance rather than withdrawal from new situations. New people, new situations, right? These, you take them to the park or Disneyland or going to school or something like that, or to daycare. They can more easily accept these than other children that we'll talk about. They can more easily adapt, to meeting new people and seeing new people. In other words, they won't freak out. They won't become overly upset or cry too much. I mean, they can at the beginning, but they will adjust and they will handle it okay. Okay? Those are the easy children. Those are the ones that are easier to raise. They have that easy temperament. But then you also have your difficult children. And for me, both of my children are difficult, okay? Irregular in their body functions, their temperament at birth, right? Very difficult. Irregular means that they don't sleep regularly. They wake you up at all times of night, okay? You try to get a good night's sleep, and you can't because they wake you up, and you try to train them to sleep certain times and be awake at others, but they want to be with you all the time, and they'll sleep, and they'll have to go comfort them, and it'll take years for you to get them to sleep normally, a normal pattern of sleep, so you can actually get a good night's sleep. And my children, it took about 2 years for them to finally get a normal pattern of sleep. They drove us nuts, okay? Irregular as far as when they're hungry, when they use the bathroom, all that will make it more difficult as well. Intense reactions, easily upset, easily fearful, okay? They get very upset, they cry a lot, they scream, and, and they're not necessarily easy to comfort. My daughter is very emotional, gets very upset, very sensitive. And so is my son, extremely sensitive, is very upset. But my son is also very fearful. Okay, he's extremely fearful. Everything scares him. Withdrawal from new stimuli. My son is afraid and will scream and try to climb on top of me if a man should come to the door to fix maybe one of our appliances. He gets so scared that he'll scream and run and will climb all over me for me to hold him. Okay, that is intense, okay? Those are intense reactions, and that is withdrawal from new situation, new stimuli, okay? They were both very fearful. When I took them to, finally went to preschool, and they were crying, and they didn't want to let go of me. It took some time to get them to adjust, but they adjusted. But they're difficult children. That's about 10% of children. They drive you crazy. They're more difficult to raise. Both of my children were like that. There's another two kinds of temperament. They're your slow to warm up children. These children are shy and cautious. Okay. Low intensity of reactions and negative moods. So they're usually shy and fearful. It takes them a little while to get going. So they'll be shy and fearful and won't react very strongly to things, won't really accept things too easily. But with time, they warm up to people, they get used to things, and they'll be okay with time. It just takes them a little while to get used to things and then to start behaving normally. They're slow to warm up. They're not very trusting of the brain. They're not, they're shy, and it just takes a while to get them going. That will affect their relationships. It will affect their learning, okay? When they get comfortable with people, and it takes a while, that is when they can learn better, and that's when they get along better, and they're easier to handle. They're slower to warm up, okay? Also low activity. They're not very active, not very playful. Like I said, it takes them a while to get comfortable, and when they do get comfortable, then they'll behave more normally. That's about 15% of children. It's your shy, kind of anxious children. And then there are children that are hard to classify. 35%, or a little bit more than a third of children, do not fit any of the categories we just talked about. They may be a mix of the others or a different pattern. That's about a third of children, okay? But most children, about 2/3, fit into one of those other three patterns, those three temperaments, which is a type of personality that we see at birth. Hard to classify, that just means that they don't fit the other categories. And usually I would have discussion here, but we're gonna have to wait until after the recording. Okay, it's just better that way when we are recording. Here's some more information about these temperaments. Okay, rhythmicity, activity level, approach, withdrawal, these different things. And the way that is for the easy child, the difficult child, and the slow to warm up child. So the easy child is more regular, okay? When it comes to, the rhythms, eating, sleeping, toileting, they're more regular. Difficult child, they're more irregular. Slow to warm up child, not really information there. It could vary, okay? Activity level, the easy child is, well, it doesn't say anything there. More like moderate. Difficult child, very high activity level. The slow to warm up child, very low. But you can see there the different things: approach, withdrawal, positive for the easy child, negative for the difficult child, negative for the slow to warm up child. Adaptability, positive, negative, negative again, same pattern. No information about sensory threshold. Quality of mood, the easy child, mostly positive. The difficult child, mostly negative. Slow to warm up child, it doesn't say there, but I would characterize it as negative. They're shy and anxious, okay? Intensity of mood, easy child, low to moderate. That's what you want. Difficult child, very intense. And the slow to warm up child, very low, because they're slow to warm up. They're very shy and anxious. They don't say much. They don't talk much. They kind of want to stay out of the way. And no information on the last thing. It's just something else I've shared with you guys, give you a little bit more information, but hopefully it's clear that children have these temperaments at birth, and we can see differences in their personality right away. Now let's talk about something that's even more interesting. Let's talk about establishing bonds. So now we're gonna get into bonds and attachment. Because you have this newborn, when you first become a mother or father, and children will form an attachment to you, and you want it to be a good kind of attachment, okay? Attachment is the need for proximity. That means the need to be close to somebody else, okay? It's strongest for infants and children, okay? They have a very strong need to be with their mother, with their father, their caregiver, whoever is taking care of them. Very strong need. They're born completely helpless and dependent, and they need you, and they form a very strong attachment usually, if things go well, a very good attachment. We'll talk about what that's called, but it's very important that they do this. And Bowlby has an attachment theory. And you can see this child is attached there to his dad. He's holding on to his leg. He probably sees something in the room that he's a bit concerned about. So he, runs to daddy, wants to hold on to daddy's leg, want to make sure everything's okay. That's a good attachment. You want that. Okay, we'll talk about those things. Bowlby's attachment theory. This is, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this, but there's a whole book that you can read that's to do with this theory. He wrote a book about attachment. But according to Bowlby, close relationships like that infant mother, infant father, infant caregiver relationship functions as an affect regulation device. It allows the child to basically regulate their emotions. Affect is emotion. And not just children, but older children as well, not just babies, but older children as well, and even adults. People seek attachment figures and resist separation during times of need, during times of stress. Children do not like to be separated from their mothers, their fathers, or caregiver at all. It's very distressing to them. And being with that caregiver, that mother, that father, helps them feel more secure. It helps them feel safe, less stressed out. It's the same thing for children who are older, teenagers, or even adults. When they are stressed out, when times are tough, they want to be with their loved ones. Because we have this need for attachment. We have this need for attachment throughout our lives. It starts early on. And we do this in order to help make ourselves feel better, okay? We need others to feel better. The attachment figure will provide protection, support, comfort, relief, for children and also for people who are older. And the attachment figure, the mother, the father, the caregiver, will also provide a secure base. It's like a home base, right? A base where they can check back and make sure everything's okay. So this child over here is showing that he has his dad as a secure base. There might be a dog or something or a person that has walked into the room, and the child's a little bit concerned. Should I be scared here? Should I continue playing, right? What should I do? So he'll go to daddy, hold on to daddy's leg. And if daddy is behaving like everything's okay, then the child will feel more secure because he has a secure base. He has someone who can run to for protection, right? To feel better. So once the child feels better, the child will then go back to exploring and playing and maybe even affiliating with others, maybe even talking to that new adult should the adult ask a question. If dad is acting like everything's okay, the child will feel safe and protected, has that secure base. And after a while, he or she will calm down and they will behave more normally. That's what a secure base is. And we need this, and we have this even as adults. When things go wrong, when things are tough, what do? You also run to your secure base. You call your significant other, your husband, your spouse, or you want to be with your friends, your mom, your dad. That's your secure base. We all have it. And it starts out as, it starts out when we're children, when this is needed. We need attachments and we form these. And hopefully they're good attachments. But I will tell you what happens when things don't go very well, when things go wrong. So what happens when an infant should become separated from the caregiver? And by the way, where it says right there, CD 12A to C, I'm not really going to show you that. That's not even a link. That was just a little reminder for myself to play that in class. But, I can't play them here. And there's other links to videos. That's just left over there. I no longer use CDs. Now I just use YouTube, okay? Sad things can happen. Very stressful things can happen to infants. They can become separated from their caregivers, from mommy, from dad, right? Their caregiver. It could be temporary or it could be permanent. And it's very distressing. And infants show, according to Bowlby, a very clear 3-stage pattern of separation anxiety. I know anxiety there looks a little bit weird. It looks like it's been double, but sometimes that happens when we present something and things get messed up a little bit. But a 3-stage pattern of separation anxiety. There's a very clear 3-stage pattern that infants show when they become separated from their attachment figure, from their mom, their dad, or the person who's taking care of them. Okay, the first pattern is protest. You know, let's say mommy leaves, right? And they protest at first. What happens? They cry, they scream, they don't want to let go. They're holding on to you. Like you're trying to go to work maybe, right? And you're trying to drop them off at daycare. Or maybe you're trying to drop them off with the babysitter. Either way, you have to leave and they protest. Okay, and even if you're leaving, let's say if you're leaving for a longer period of time, let's say you're taking a trip, you're gonna be gone for weeks or months, or maybe you're leaving permanently, and you know they will protest either way. They don't want you to leave. Okay, protest. They cry, they scream. You know, it's basically them saying, "Don't leave me, I need you." That kind of stuff, right? Well, you leave. Okay, and then eventually, after you leave, they enter the stage of despair. Inactivity, helplessness. It's like they're depressed. They're sad. They feel miserable. Okay? They won't be very active in school or in daycare. They won't talk very much. They'll kind of sit there and still be kind of sniffling a little bit and feel helpless and won't really participate. It's like they're depressed. And then eventually they will exit that stage of despair and will enter the stage of detachment, where it's like they've adjusted a little bit. Lack of concern, coolness toward the parents. So when they enter the stage of detachment, it's like they're okay now. It's like, okay, I can handle this, no big deal. You can leave, mommy, I'm fine, you know? They adjust. It's like, okay, I don't need you that much anymore, I'll be okay. That's that thing, okay? And I wanna point out that older children, it's not just infants, but older children, even adults, show the same pattern. And I'll give you an example, right? When you're have a boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe even a husband or wife, and they leave you. What happens? First, you know, you go through the same three-stage pattern. First is the stage of protest. You don't want them to leave. There you are crying, right? Don't leave me. I need you. Please, I'll do anything. That's protest, okay? And then they leave you and you enter the stage of despair. You're depressed and miserable and you're not very productive, not very active. You don't want to go out. Work suffers, school suffers. If you're going to school, you're in the stage of despair. But eventually you emerge from that stage and you enter the stage of detachment. You get over them. Lack of concern, coolness toward that person. You don't need them anymore. And sometimes they try to come back to you afterward. And you tell them, it's like, I don't need you. I don't love you anymore. Get the hell away from me. I don't care about you anymore. That's the stage of detachment. But they might still be able to convince you to get back with them. Okay? Just be careful, because the reason they may be coming back is because, you know, they left you for somebody else and then that didn't work out with that person. And then now they're coming back to you. So, you know, the point is we go through the same three-stage pattern of separation anxiety. Okay? Very interesting. We show that as infants and we show the same pattern as adults. Now let's talk more about attachment. Mary Ainsworth, which a lot of you have probably heard of, was one of John Bowlby's students. She was one of John Bowlby's graduate students. And Mary Ainsworth took this idea of attachment that Bowlby studied and developed it further. Mary Ainsworth is known for having developed what's called the strange situation study. It's a study where she basically exposed the infant to certain kinds of distress and separation, okay? This is what happens. Here's an outline of it. So she has parents, usually the mother, come in with her infant, and the parent and child are alone in an observation room with toys. They've been very careful to make that observation room look like a play area. There's a little rug, there's toys, you know, it's like a happy little place. And the mother and the child are there alone at the beginning. And then after a while, a stranger will walk into the room and begin talking with the mother. How will the child behave? Will the child show stranger wariness? That happens at about 9 months. 9 months is when children show stranger wariness. In other words, they become concerned that someone new, a stranger, has walked into the room, and they will be kind of concerned and shy and will stop what they're doing. That starts at about 9 months. Believe it or not, before 9 months, it doesn't bother them that a stranger should walk in. Stranger wariness starts at about 9 months. They're concerned, maybe even a little bit afraid that a stranger's in the room. And then after a while, the mother will then leave and will leave the child alone with the stranger. What happens then? The child may show separation anxiety. It's normal for children to show separation anxiety at age 1. By age 2, it intensifies and gets even worse. And then it subsides as children are better able to handle the parent leaving and going, coming and going. Okay. But what happens when the mother leaves the child and leaves that child alone with the stranger? The mother eventually returns and the stranger leaves. The reunion, what happens then? Then the mother will leave the infant completely alone. Nobody there, no stranger, no mother, right? How does the child behave? Eventually the stranger returns, and then the stranger leaves and the mother returns. How does the child handle those series of stressors, you could call them? Okay. The interesting thing is when Mary Ainsworth did this study, she identified that there's 4 different attachment styles. And a lot of you have probably heard about this. The kind of attachment you want with your infant, or hopefully the kind of attachment you had with your own mother, your own caregiver when you were little, hopefully is a secure attachment. A secure attachment is 50 to 70% of infants in the US have a secure attachment with their parents, or with at least one parent. And that is identified as type B. The type B attachment style is basically, one that is secure. The infant is trusting and feels secure about, when the mother's around, just to put it clearly. So this is what happens, okay? It's a very good relationship to have with your infant, a secure attachment. When the mother is present, the infant is there, feels comfortable, plays happily, and uses the mother as a secure base for exploration. Every now and then, the infant, right, will come back to mommy and give mommy a kiss or a hug and wants to know that everything's okay, and then we'll go back to playing. They're checking in, so to speak, using the mother as a secure base. When the mother leaves, the child pauses, is concerned, basically. They show some distress. They're not happy. When the stranger enters, the child will avoid the stranger. But if mommy should be around, if mommy is friendly with the stranger, then the child will also be friendly. So again, the mother is functioning as a secure base, and they feel safe and secure as long as mommy's around, and they will then, be friendly with the stranger. Remember, the mother eventually leaves and then returns, okay? When the mother returns, if she's been gone, the child will seek contact with the mother or the caregiver, will feel assured and comfortable, and will continue playing after that. So they're easily comforted, when there's a reunion, and they easily, go back to feeling secure and will be playing again. Hopefully that's the kind of relationship you had with your mother, your father, your caregiver, right? When you were a child, because it's a good relationship. It's a relationship that's characterized by trust, basically, like, Erikson talked about, right? Your mother did things right, or your caregiver did things right. So you have a good relationship with them. You trust them and you feel comfortable around them. You don't like it when they leave, but when they come back, you're glad to see them. So that's the good kind of relationship. Now there's other relationships that are not so good. Okay. There are infants that show what we call an insecure avoidant attachment style. Type A. A stands for avoidant. You could just think of these children as being avoidant. When the mother is present, the child plays happily, okay? But avoids the caregiver, doesn't check in with, let's say, the mother, just plays and ignores the mother, basically. It's like she's not even there. He's playing happily. Mommy's there. He doesn't really notice. He's just there. He plays. When the mother leaves, the child continues playing, rarely cries, may not even notice. When the stranger enters, the child continues playing, ignores the stranger. The mother returns, the child will avoid the mother, ignore the mother, may not have even noticed that she was gone. So these children are avoidant. They basically have learned to avoid their caregivers. They have learned to leave people alone. And why is that? It might be because the mother dislikes or are indifferent to physical contact. The mother or the father or the caregiver, let's just talk about the mother to make it clear. The mother doesn't really like to be around the infant that much. No, it's like, leave mommy alone. Mommy's got work to do. Mommy's got to talk about her. Mommy's got to do this. And basically the children after a while just learn to leave mommy alone and they avoid her. Okay, these are parents who are not very, very attached to their infants, or at least, they make the children avoidant basically by ignoring them. Okay, let's keep going. And then we enter another, next slide, another type of attachment style that is also not very good, one you do not necessarily want, is to have an insecure, resistant, or ambivalent kind of relationship with your infant, that type of attachment, or your infant to have an ambivalent attachment to you, or insecure, resistant. Ambivalent means that they don't know. They don't know it. Like they're unsure, they're insecure. Okay, so that's type C. And the way I remember it is type C, I would classify that as type C for clingy. These are the children who are clingy. They don't trust you and they're very clingy. Okay, when the mother is present, the child is anxious, very clingy, will not play with the toys, wants to be holding on to mommy. The child is afraid. What is the child really afraid of? Well, the child's afraid that mommy's gonna leave. And they don't want that. When the mother does leave, the child is very distressed. Will stop playing if the child was playing at all. Might just play if mommy plays too, and they'll be very distressed, and they'll cry and just they'll have a hard time. If a stranger enters, the child will be very fearful and avoid the stranger. When the mother returns, the child will be angry, crying and clingy, and may hit the mother. Right? It's like, why did you leave? That kind of stuff. They're just very, very clingy and they don't want you to leave them. And they don't take it very well when you do, and they're not easily comforted. That's a key point there. When you return, they're not easily comforted. Okay, they're very clingy. They're very fearful. Why? Probably because you've been inconsistent as a mother, right? Or maybe because they are very anxious all on their own. We'll talk about those things in a moment. Let's keep going. And then there's also another type, the disorganized type, type D for disorganized. Okay, 5 to 10% of infants. When the mother is there, the child is kind of cautious. May not necessarily play. The child doesn't know what to think. Mother leaves, the child stares, yells, looks scared, confused. It's basically, the child is basically disorganized, doesn't know what to do. And by disorganized, I don't mean that, he's not neat, but I'm saying is the child can behave in many different ways. It's not acting normal, okay? When the mother returns, the child may freeze, scream, hit themselves, throw things at the mother. They're showing very odd behavior. And these are children usually who have, mental disabilities. Often mental disabilities, they may have a disability or have some kind of personality disorder. It could be several things, or the parents are really bad and are making the child basically, develop a disorder. Sometimes it's the child, if your child has autism, they may show this. My child has shown some of this sometimes, but he's a lot better now. But it could also be that you're mistreating the child, abusing them, so to speak. All right, moving on. I get a little emotional sometimes. Let's keep going and let's talk about what leads to some of these things. Okay, I get a little bit emotional there because it's messed up, right? There's a video there on attachment styles that you can see on your own. I'm not going to try to play it for the lecture. Okay, but here's a whole bunch of things here, what research suggests about these things. Like a secure attachment is more likely to have that good attachment with your child, right? If the parent is sensitive and responsive, right? Makes a lot of sense. The infant and the parent the infant-parent relationship is in high synchrony. You're there when, they call on you, when they need you, okay? The infant's temperament is easy. That's important, right? Easy children are easier to raise. You get along with them better. If the parents are not stressed about income, other children, their marriage, if your marriage is awful and your environment is a mess, and by that, I don't mean that it's messy and it's not clean. I mean that your life is a mess and there's a lot of chaos. If that is happening, then you won't have a secure attachment with your infant, most likely. There's a lot of stress, basically. The parents have a working model of secure attachment to their own parents. If you had a secure relationship with your own parents early on, then you know about trust, you know what a good relationship looks like, and you're more likely to have that with your own kids as well. But the other insecure attachment, which is, by the way, insecure, which is the insecure ones will be basically the avoidant ones, the ones that are clingy, and even the ones that are disorganized. Those are all insecure. They're secure and insecure. All the other three fall under the insecure category. If the parent mistreats the child, abuse, right, neglect, that kind of stuff, will lead to an insecure attachment. If you neglect your children, that makes type A more likely. They can become avoidant. Abuse increases type C, the clingy type, and the disorganized type. You know, the disorganized type is the ones that are basically showing that they have, a personality disorder potentially, that they're abnormal, basically, that they have psychological issues. If the mother is mentally ill, that increases insecure types. Paranoia, if they're paranoid, that increases type D. Disorganized, depression increases type C. Make your children more clingy if you're depressed. If the parents are highly stressed about income, other children, their marriage, right? Parental stress increases type A and D, avoidant and disorganized. If the parents are intrusive and controlling, that will make your children more type A. You'll make them withdraw and make them avoidant. If the parents are alcoholics, alcoholic father will, leads to more of an avoidant child, and alcoholic mother, more disorganized child. If the child's temperament is difficult, that's likely to lead to type C. If the child is slow to warm up, they're more likely to be type A, more likely to be avoidant. A lot of interesting stuff there that I wish we could discuss, but I am recording and we'll save the discussion for later, and we'll see how much time there is because I tend to overdo it, and we'll see how much time we have. Let's keep going. I tend to overdo it with the talking sometimes, especially with the interesting stuff. Remember, there is a recording. Sometimes I talk a little bit fast, but you have a recording. All right. Emotional development, not as interesting, but something, how these emotions develop. Newborns, believe it or not, are not capable of too many emotions. They're only capable of two things: distress and contentment when it comes to emotional development. So they cry when things aren't right, when they're cold, hungry, in pain, scared, they'll cry. And when things are okay, they'll show contentment. They won't be crying. Okay? They'll be okay. They'll be content. They're content when they're fed, relaxed, asleep. But when they're crying, that means things are wrong. Okay? So it's just those two things: distress, which means they're crying, or contentment. That's all they have at the beginning. After a few weeks, they develop curiosity, interest. They look around and might even laugh when they see something new, something that's interesting. Okay? But it's not real laughter yet. It's just a sign of pleasure. Okay? 6 weeks, they start showing, more pleasure, right? Evidenced by a social smile. By 6 weeks, you see them, they form real smiles, a smile elicited by the human face. Before that, if you see a smile, it's more of something that is kind of random, where the child isn't really smiling, but they make that face, and it doesn't really mean that they're happy yet. It's just the face that they're making as they make all these little faces, randomly. Emotion development, 3 to 4 months, they show full responsive smiles. So bigger smiles, real smiles, right? And laughter when the caregiver makes faces and noises, right? So they don't just laugh when something is interesting, but they laugh when something is funny, okay? By 8 months, they start showing real anger, okay? That's triggered by frustration. Remember before, it's just discontentment, which means they're not happy. By 8 months, they show real anger. There's something they want and they're not getting it, and they get frustrated. Maybe they're hungry, for instance, and you're not feeding them, and they'll get angry. And you can tell when they're angry because they'll cry, but it won't just be your normal cry. It'll be like a cry where it's different. You'll know it if you see it. It's not that screaming crying or that quiet crying. It's a kind of crying where you can tell they're frustrated, okay? Or maybe they want to touch the cat and you won't let them, and you take away the cat again and again, and they'll become frustrated and they'll cry out of frustration. By 9 months, they start showing fear. Remember, stranger wariness, when they become very cautious, they don't smile when someone gets too close, someone they don't know, or an animal moves too quickly, or someone moves too quickly. That's stranger wariness. They are concerned. Okay, before this, they're not really concerned about strangers. Okay, but that's when that develops. Before 9 months, a stranger could walk in and they won't really show distress. Somebody could pick up your child and they won't really show distress. But by 9 months, some children a little bit earlier, some a little bit later, They will show stranger wariness. If somebody should pick up your child, they will cry. Okay, someone they don't know. Separation anxiety, tears, anger when a caregiver leaves, right? That's 9 to 14 months. And remember, it intensifies by age 2, but they show it around this time. They don't want you to leave, okay? And they don't want to let go. That's separation anxiety. They're scared. They're concerned. By the second year, you start seeing more complex emotions, okay, that involve more brain development, more cognitive development, more development of understanding, okay? Pride, shame, embarrassment, and guilt all require the development of self-awareness. The awareness, not just the development of self-awareness, but the awareness of what others people may be thinking, okay? And self-awareness, like I mentioned. So these are complex emotions: pride, shame, and embarrassment. That means you have to be aware of yourself, aware of what you're doing, and aware that other people are looking at you and thinking about what you do or what you look like or something like that. That's when they'll start showing pride, shame, and embarrassment and guilt, okay? Self-awareness is the realization that one is distinct in body, mind, and action from others. Self-awareness is basically when we finally recognize ourselves and we have an idea of who we are that is separate from others. When children start saying me, mine, I, that kind of stuff, okay? That means they're beginning to distinguish between themselves and others. It fosters other emotions like defiance, jealousy, empathy, and affection. They have to be aware of themselves for those things to be possible. For them to show defiance, they're aware of you as a separate person from them, and they don't want what you want. For them to be jealous of somebody else, they have to be aware of themselves and somebody else. For them to show empathy, that caring for other people, they have to basically be aware of others. Or to show affection, they have to be aware of others and themselves as well. Speaking of self-awareness, let's talk a little bit about that because it's to do with emotional development. According to Mahler, infants at the beginning do not have self-awareness. They see themselves as part of the mother during the first 4 months. According to Mahler, the infant may not even know, doesn't even realize that the mother is someone who's distinct from them, separate from them. Because mommy's kind of holding the child and feeding them, breastfeeding them. And then when the child falls asleep, the mommy puts the child down. Right? So when the child is awake, the child is being held. So the child may not even know that mommy is a separate entity from them. By 5 months, infants start developing a sense of themselves separate from the mother. They start realizing that no, mommy's not always here, and sometimes they're awake when mommy's not there, and that mommy is separate. 15 to 18 months, the emergence of the me self. There's the emergence of the me self, which means that they see themselves as an object of their own knowledge, that they know that they are separate, different, something else to be known, other than mommy, other than the other things, that they are separate. That's the emergence of the me self, right? And they start developing self-awareness. And you know that a child has developed self-awareness by doing what we call the rouge test. All you do is you put a spot of rouge or a red spot on their nose and place the infant in front of the mirror. A child that is under 12 months will not notice the dot. They won't touch their face. They won't act like something is wrong. They have no self-awareness. They don't yet recognize themselves. Self-awareness begins with just recognizing oneself. By 15 to 24 months, when an infant has a red spot on their nose and you put them in front of the mirror, they will touch their own nose, express curiosity, right? Puzzlement. They know that that's them looking back, and they know that that spot shouldn't be there. And that means they recognize themselves. That's the beginning of self-awareness, just the ability to recognize oneself. And self-awareness will develop further as they get older, and they'll learn their names and who they are, whether they're boys or girls. That's all part of self-awareness. More about emotions. So emotions evolve with cognitive development. Okay, as their brain develops and they're better able to comprehend things and understand things, the emotions will develop. Their self-concept develops with self-awareness. It starts with self-awareness, just them basically being aware that there's something separate, something different. And then they, like I said, they will learn their names, whether they're a boy or a girl. They will learn that these are their toys, their clothes, and they'll develop a self-concept, an idea of who they are. And there's some interesting research here about self-evaluations, how children view themselves. The evaluation of one's own abilities, they become important during this time. According to Belsky, study he did or she, I don't remember, but according to Belsky, a study that was done in 1997, toddlers that receive less parental praise are actually more proud of themselves. That seems contradictory, counterintuitive, right? You would think that toddlers that receive praise would feel better about themselves, but turns out they don't, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. Kelly and others in 2000 did another study where they figured out why that may be the case. According to Kelly, children that receive positive comments from their mother do not necessarily show more pride and less shame. If the mother is always positive, oh, good job, son, right? Good job, honey. That kind of stuff. And they're always positive in their comments, the children won't necessarily feel better about themselves. Okay? And that's because they get used to it. Okay? They get used to it, and then the comments become meaningless. Parents who give neutral comments to their children are more likely to complete activities, try new challenges, right? It makes them kind of strive to get better. Don't always say nice things. Sometimes say, yeah, that was okay, or it could have been better. And then they're more likely to try, okay? And when they do try and do well, then they'll feel better about themselves. Negative comments, of course, will lead to more shame and less effort, okay? When you say that was awful, that was bad, they feel bad. They'll feel, they feel bad about themselves, and they're less likely to try. Let's move on, but I have to plug in the laptop because this thing, I don't have it plugged in, and it drains very quickly, I guess. This new thing, I guess it's supposed to have a longer lifetime for the battery, but the problem is that Zoom uses a lot of energy, I guess. So I'm gonna have to plug this in and move. So hold on a second, I'm still recording. Okay, now let's talk about daycare, okay? A lot of people are gonna need daycare. They're gonna put their children in daycare. According to one study done some years ago, more than 50%, more than half of 1-year-olds are in some regularly scheduled non-maternal care. So what that means is that more than 50% of 1-year-olds, someone else other than their mother is basically taking care of them. And sometimes that is daycare. Okay, most researchers agree that daycare does not harm children. At least decent daycare, good daycare doesn't harm children and can actually be beneficial. Okay, there's two types of daycare. There's family daycare, where the child is being taken care of by someone, in the family. Okay, or is being taken care of with other kids as a part of a family. Right? Some other woman might be taking care of them. And then allo care. Allo care literally means other care. Someone else is taking care of your children. It's not family daycare, right? And that includes things like center daycare. Center daycare is a type of daycare where you take your kids somewhere, usually in some other place, there's a building or something, or a place like that where they specialize in taking care of children. Family daycare might just be where you drop off your kid at somebody else's house, for instance, and there's a woman there or somebody who takes care of children. Center daycare is basically different, where there's an actual place where people have been trained in how to take care of children, and it's more of a business, okay? Not just somebody taking care of your kids. Now, people do charge for taking care of kids. That could be family daycare as well, but this is more professional daycare, okay? And research shows that with center daycare, it can actually have benefits. Children's language seems to get better and improve, okay? Because they're exposed to other children, they hear more language, right? Their social skills are improved. They're more likely to have a broader perspective. It's not just me, right? There's other children there, and they have to learn to share and communicate, right? There's improved cognitive development. With high quality daycare, center daycare, they actually learn and get better. Okay, it helps their learning. Of course, high quality daycare, at least around here, isn't necessarily easy to find. We'll talk about that. What is high quality daycare? High quality daycare includes several different things. First of all, there has to be a low caregiver to infant ratio. And that means that there's not just a bunch of kids running around and one person taking care of them. Okay, low caregiver to infant ratio means that, what they recommend is that there's 2 caregivers for every 5 infants. So if there's like 5 kids, there's two adults, or if there's 10 kids, there's 4. Okay, so you need a lot of people taking care of those kids and to give them individual attention. Okay, high quality daycare encourages language and sensory motor development. So they'll read stories, they'll play games, sing songs, have conversations. They'll have toys and a playground, for them to play in. All those kinds of things, right, are important. There's an attention to health and safety. They have bathrooms, or restrooms, I should say, and they're clean and they're safe. Okay, you can tell they're cleaned regularly and they're safe. And the play areas are also clean and safe. They have padded playground areas. Okay, it's not just that there's swings there and a slide over some concrete. That's not safe. Children will fall and hurt themselves, can even break a bone. The play areas should be padded, and that padding that they put underneath is actually expensive. Or maybe it should be on grass or something like that, but not on gravel, not on concrete or a wooden floor or a tile floor or anything like that. That's not safe. So they pay attention to these things. Well-trained professional caregivers. The caregivers, have a degree or a certificate in early childhood education, which you can get, by the way, here at the college. They have trained professionals or people who are in training, who are part of their training is to help out taking care of the children as well. The people either are in training or already have a degree or certificate. Okay, but it's part of their training also to take care of those children. They're going through a program, and there's other people who are trained, who are mentoring them as well, but they get to observe and things like that. The caregivers the staff is warm and responsive. They engage children in problem solving and discussion. You can tell that they like children, and they smile. They are genuine. They're people who can fake it, but they're genuine. You can tell that they like children. And yeah, it's mostly women who work at these places, but there's also some men, but women are, on average, a bit more nurturing and caring than men are. But men can be caring as well, but usually it's women who run the place and who are the ones who are, providing the daycare. Men are involved too, but it's mostly women. Studies find that, daycare studies find that the attachment to the mother is as secure among infants in daycare. In other words, if you send your infant to daycare, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be so attached to you and they're going to become avoidant or something like that, and they won't care about you. That's not true. They will be just as secure to you if you put them in daycare than if you don't. The warmth of the mother is actually more influential, has more influence on the infant than the actual daycare. Okay, the warmth of the mother. Okay, daycare can be detrimental, and that means daycare can be harmful if the mother is insensitive, mean and insensitive, and they go to daycare. Well, that in that case, daycare can be harmful if it's not good quality care, and especially if they're in there 20 hours or more. So your mother is mean, and you get put in daycare for 20 hours or more, and it's not even good daycare. So it's even worse. Mother's not doing a good job, and neither are the people in daycare. That's when it can be harmful. Okay, and there's a lot of bad daycare out there, by the way. Okay. Boys that receive extensive non-maternal care, when you have boys and that are being taken care of by someone other than their mother for a long period of time, they are more quarrelsome, more aggressive. They have more conflicts with the teacher. Boys in general are more troublesome in daycare than girls. And in daycare, especially, in the ones that are professional, believe it or not, you'll see that they prefer girls than boys. And you'll see more girls in there than boys. Boys are just harder to deal with. And it's not that they don't want your kid there, your boy there, but, parents often know that, this kid's not ready to be there yet. I have to keep him with me or something like that, okay? Center care is better than home care. Sometimes your children are better off in daycare if the mother is depressed and basically neglecting the children and not looking after them, or if the home lacks stimulation or attention for the infant. People grow up sometimes in some really bad circumstances, where the home doesn't provide that much stimulation for the infant. Remember, infants need all kinds of stimulation. They need an area to play. They need toys and books and little gadgets, and even tablets can be helpful. You play little games with them on the tablet. They can learn their words. They can learn to read, and on the tablet, there's all kinds of things that are good, that apps that you can get to help them develop. But good nutrition, all those things. And if the home is just a very bad environment, they're better off in daycare, especially if it's good quality care, in good daycare, I should say. They're better off there. And sad to say, some of you probably grew up in places like that, or maybe are raising your children in places like this. I mean, if you live in a place, let's say you're just a renter, you live in an apartment building, and it's just a building with a parking lot. There's not much there for your infant. A good place to live, even if you rent, would be a big apartment complex that will have usually playgrounds, maybe even a pool, of course, that you need to be with your kid there to keep them safe, play areas that are safe, and a whole bunch of things that are stimulating to the child. Not just a building with a parking lot, and all the children can do is basically play in that small space or play there in the parking lot, and they're likely to get run over. That's not a good situation, but a lot of people grew up that way. But they're better off in a place that is more stimulating, and you as a parent might not always be able to afford the things that you need to provide your child to provide a good environment. But in a good daycare, they will provide those things. Here's the thing though, it's expensive. The good news is that there is often help for daycare, and you can get financial assistance, or they might waive fees or a big portion of the daycare. I can tell you that my children, I had to put them in daycare because both me and my wife had to work. And we both teach. And, we put them in the Child Development Center right there in the college campus right there. They have a Child Development Center. Very good quality care. The best one I found. I looked around all over this valley, and there was another one that was good called La Petite. But these places, are expensive. I think if you're going to have your kid in there, I think, let's say for about, I forget how much it costs, but if your kid's gonna be in there full time, like 8 hours a day for a month, it's gonna be like more than $1,000 a month. It's expensive. Most people cannot afford that who live in this valley. But you might qualify for some kind of assistance, and it might be half that or less than that. I had to pay full price, of course, because I work at the college, and I don't qualify for any financial assistance, nor do I think I should. But they were really good. And like I said, there's another one called La Petite, and they're really good, but again, it's expensive. And expensive, when daycare is expensive, that means it usually costs you more than $1,000 a month. Think about how much money that is, okay? And then when your children are finally old enough to go to school, you're kind of a big relief. Okay, now at least I can put them in school and I don't have to pay for that anymore, right? Save you a lot of money because you pay for that through your taxes, the public education. But it's hard to find good quality care. I looked around, some churches sometimes provide care. There's after school programs in some places. And I looked at them, and most of them were downright awful. I looked around in some places, they said, oh yeah, you can go ahead and look around, see what we do here. And I saw kids running around, like animals, nobody watching them. They're fighting, they're bullying each other. I saw a lot of disorganization in some places where they couldn't even find anything. It's really bad for the most part, what I saw out here. Remember, we live in an impoverished area out here, but there are a few good places, but they're not cheap, okay? But they provide really good quality care. La Petite, there might be others, and then of course the Child Development Center on campus, okay? The west side, Antelope Valley College, the west side of the West Campus, of course. That is where we will stop, okay? Let me turn this off.